All right, welcome back. We are Game 2014 in the fall 2022 semester at George Brown, and it's week 1, part 2 of our broadcast and recording together. And where last we left off, we were setting up Unity, actually running Unity here, and I've got it up here. And this is what you would typically see. Now, there's a lot of glare from the windows for you guys that are on the left there. On the right, it's not so bad. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the lighting. Let's see if we can get that glare down. If someone can assist on that side. Otherwise, what's going to happen is we're going to have lots of glare. There we go. Maybe that's a little better. Yeah, and let me turn the lights down just a touch, just so you get some better view of things. There we go. That should be better for you guys. All right, so on the left, when we start off with Unity, you can see that this is your default Unity setup, and this setup is terrible. Okay, and let me tell you why. For me, on the left, you have your hierarchy, right, with Unity. And at the bottom, you have your project and asset files. And then way over here, you have your context-sensitive inspector, right? So if I open up my hierarchy here, you can see like I have a main camera on the left side of Unity here. And on the right, we have our context. I have to do this across the screen. That's dumb, all right? I don't like that kind of thing. In my opinion, it's not that great. Now, there are reasons why this layout came about, but I'm not really happy with it. So I want to make a brand new layout. Unity's environment can be modified and adjusted to your specifications. You can actually get rid of some of these windows if you want, and that's what we're going to do. So to start our brand new layout, go to the right corner where it says default and select tall. Please do that. What tall does is it pushes that hierarchy to the right, and our inspector stays to the right. Right? Now take a look at this. We have a lot more screen real estate on the left-hand side we can work with. I want to take my selectors. These are all my selectors, how I select objects in the scene. And I want to drag and drop this little tools window. I want to drag and drop it onto the, kind of the top. That's where I like it. You might like it floating. I think it's just a distraction and it's kind of in my space. I like to make it as minimal as possible, so I put it up here. Okay? Next, this asset area over here on the right, I want to drag this little slider to the left and make it a list. That's a little bit more efficient for me again than big folders. Like, what does this do for me? Nothing, right? This is way better. For me, it makes it a little nicer, okay? And notice that I have editor, scenes, tutorial info, and packages. Inside of assets, I have assets and packages, right? Scenes is something that I work with a lot. So what I want you to do around scenes, I want just to click once and click again. And I want you, these are just like folders, and I want you to put these square brackets around them like this. So anything we want to prioritize, we're going to put square brackets around. And because square brackets come before, symbols come before alphanumeric characters, right? They're going to be, it's going to bubble up to the top. We don't care about the README file, so we can right click and delete this. We don't care about the README file, so delete that. In fact, we really don't care about the tutorial info at all. Let's get rid of that too. So let's get rid of those two folders. It's a lot of waste of space, okay? The editor modifications we want to keep, so please don't change anything in the editor folder for now. And it'll take a second for those scripts to be removed, okay? The editor folder actually has some additional changes for notification settings. We're going to leave that there, so please don't change anything there. However, in the scenes folder, the scenes with a square brackets around it, there is a main scene. And I want you to think about what a scene is in Unity. And again, guys, for this semester, my assumption is going to be you don't know anything about Unity. I'm going to train you again from the beginning, all right? And same thing with Josh. Josh, when he sees you, and I think that's going to happen on Mondays or Tuesdays. I think it might be Tuesdays. I don't know when it is for you guys, right? He is also going to train you as if you don't know Unity. That's the assumption, okay? And this is good because it's going to bring you up to speed. Everyone's going to be on the same level, if you will, with Unity. So I want you to open up the scenes or click on the scenes, and where it's a sample scene, I want you to click once and click again, and then just rename this to main. Okay, it's going to ask you to reload the scene. That's okay, do that. So now you have scenes with square brackets. Inside you have the main scene. Okay, wonderful. That's number one. One thing that my layout is missing right now is the console. And we can get any windows that were closed up here. If you go to the window menu, and if you scroll down to where it says general, you're going to see that there's an area here that says console. So please go to the console menu option and choose it. It's going to bring a floating console up like this, and we can grab it from the left corner, which is the tab, and drag the left corner where you want it, like down over here, like so. Okay? Some people like the console down here because it's small and unobtrusive. Some people like to put the console down here so that way you can see console errors coming up over here. Personally, it just eats up my screen real estate. I don't like it, so that's why I put it over here. But you can put it wherever you feel like you think it's best. This is part of it. Now the other part of my screen, or my little layout, is the game. So there's two parts, there's two little tabs here. Scene is your editor. This is what we do behind the scenes when we create we can drag and drop objects into the scene to make them go, if you will, in Unity, right? Game is a simulation, a preview of what your game is going to look like. What we want to do with game, because right now this is geared towards free aspect. If we're going to populate the game on WebGL, then we want to change from free aspect. I want to change it to something like our own. And the way you can do that is you can click this little plus button and you can define your own resolution in here on your own. I'm going to choose 1024 by 768, and you can attach a label, whatever label you want to call this thing. I just called it WebGL. So this way, if I go to WebGL, then you can see that it's going to take on the properties of that size. WebGL for this semester is one of our outputs. This is one of the things that we're going to be doing this semester. I'm going to output to WebGL. Okay? However, not only does the game do that, but this game tab, but notice on the left where it says game, it's way on the left here, right? We can pull this down and choose simulator. And so Unity has a really cool built-in simulator that looks just like this. Again, instead of game, I pull down simulator. And then don't choose an iPad, choose a Samsung Galaxy S10, right, which they have. Look, here's the S10e, right? It's not exactly the S10 Plus, but it's the S10e. And I want to put it, notice on here on the top, there's rotate. I can rotate to the left my phone. Here's what it looks like. And I can add in the safe area. And the safe area, this little yellow area here, tells us that this is the place on a phone, on this phone, where it's safe for me to put assets. If I'm going to play stuff, it's going to be here in this area here. Okay? We will test with this phone, and we will also test with the iPhone, one version of the iPhone. For example, they have the iPhone 12 Pro Max and the iPhone 12. If you look at the iPhone 12, the safe area is different than on the Samsung Galaxy phone, right? And the reason why this is the way it is because on the iPhone, we have an area here that you can push up with your finger, right? So you can go to the next app, or you can switch apps. It's like an app switcher that's built into the iPhone. There's a little area here that's like sensitive to your finger touch, right? On the Samsung Galaxy phones, in this particular case, it is not. That's why it has here. You can install additional devices, right? So it says, when you say install additional devices, right? It's just going to resolve some packages. And I'm doing this because this is new for Unity 2022. So bear with it. There's a bit of an install. Wait for it. And the reason why we want to do this is it gives us other options for testing. Okay? So it's done. And if I go down, now we're going to see a bit of a longer list of items. Right? Like, for example, I have the iPhone XR, right? So maybe I want to see what that looks like with the cutout, right? And maybe we want to use the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus. There it is. There's the same one that we set up on our LD player. And now this is more realistic, okay? So you can adjust and add additional devices, which is pretty cool. We're going to be using this simulator throughout the semester. One thing to note, when you set up your simulator, you cannot use standard inputs. For example, mouse and keyboard when you're using your game. That's why we need to kind of set up our, from simulator, let's go back from simulator and let's go back to game for a second. In game, I have WebGL, but sometimes what we want also is we want a setting here that emulates what it would be like to have our game in the window here, right? So instead of WebGL, let's make another resolution, and we're just going to call this mobile. And remember what the resolution is, right? The width is 3040, and the height is 1440. If you did this and press OK, then you're going to get the same ratio, right, for your device as you would if you went to the simulator. Notice that? If I went from game to simulator, now it's the same ratio. So I've got a couple of setups here. I've got a couple of settings. One of them is WebGL, if I want to port to WebGL. The other one is mobile, 3040 by 1440, and I made those, right? Okay, this is a good start for us, and my friends, this is the beginning of our pro layout, right? So now we're going to save. We're going to go to, on the top right corner, we're going to save our layout, and we're going to call this, and you can call it your name. I'm going to say Tom's 2D mobile layout. You're going to call this whatever your name is, 2D mobile layout. And this way you can switch between this layout and other ones. For example, Joss might have you working like this. He might say, well, I like this layout. Let's go back to this one. That's okay. But you can always jump back to the one you just made, okay, which has all the features and everything else you like. That's your first step. Next, let's save this. So file, save project. We don't have anything in here yet. We just have this little, kind of layout. Notice that my camera is showing in the editor is showing the same shape as what's in my game area here. So this is the same ratio. It's kind of showing the same ratio here. That's why I put it together. Okay, overview of Unity. Let's do a very quick overview. One, we have this area here on the left, which is your editor. This is where we can drag and drop game objects and other things in Unity, okay? We also have the game, which is a preview, okay? That's what that is. On the right, you have your hierarchy. Think about this as all the objects in the scene graph. The scene graph, where the scene itself, main, is a container for all other objects here. And the only object we have in the scene right now is a main camera. When I left click on any of the objects in the scene in the hierarchy, on the right-hand side, we have a context-sensitive inspector that comes up that gives us properties for each of the objects inside the hierarchy that we're clicking. I'm just going to close the door here. One sec. So I'm talking about this really slow. Bear with me. I'm going slow. You probably know all this already, some of you, if you've used Unity. If you haven't used Unity, or if it's been a while, this might be new to you. Okay, so on the left, I'm clicking on main camera. Here I've got a bunch of properties. One thing to note about all game objects, I'm just going to bring this a little bigger. We can resize these windows any way we want. And for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to talk about this for a second. All game objects in Unity, and that means everything that you put inside the scene, have position, rotation, and scale. It's the transform component. Unity uses a component-based system. It's not entity component system. It's not an ECS, right? But it uses components. This is a component, the transform, and you can see that there's a little, container here, or we like to call it a drawer. This is a drawer, and you can collapse it if you want, right? Here is another component. It's the camera component, right? So in effect, if you think about it, if I add an empty game object, let's do that now. So if I right-click somewhere in my scene, and if I go to create empty, right, you're going to see that I can make this empty object whatever I want. Let's call this empty object the game controller. Here's the game controller, right? Notice that the similarities between the game controller and the main camera both have a transform component, right? The game controller right now has nothing, but if I wanted to, I could add in a camera component to it. Watch. So I can just go to add component, and I can search for camera, and I can add the camera component onto it, and therefore creating a second camera. I'm showing you this not because I need a second camera. You can also remove a component. On the right-hand side, there's these little ellipses over here on the right, and I can remove a component just by clicking here and then just say remove component. So I can add and remove components any way I want. This means that although I've got a main camera, it's a game object that's labeled as a main camera, it's just a game object. It has 3 components. One that's mandatory, the transform component, and 2 that are optional, the camera and the audio listener. The audio listener in the scene is wherever the camera is positioned in the scene is where you pick up audio cues. Okay, that's how it works. Other things that we can see inside of the main camera. The camera component has multiple properties. The general rule of thumb is this. If you see a property that is exposed in the inspector, you can probably programmatically code it. Example, if I see clear flags as a property in the camera, maybe there's a way of me accessing clear flags property through code. That's what I'm saying, okay? So pretty cool. That's what this is. And so far we have this game controller and it's empty. We can also attach scripts to the game controller. Let's make our first script today. I'm going to do this slightly different than I've done last semester. So in order for me to do that, I need another little folder. I like to organize my folders into I compartmentalize them. So I click assets, and in here where I have scenes, I'm going to make a brand new folder called scripts. So I'm going to make a new folder, right? And so create folder. And when I create my folder, I'm going to call it scripts. I'm going to put square brackets around it because scripts is one of the folders I'm going to work on a lot. Notice that scripts now come before editor because they have square brackets. Also note that, I'm just going to zoom in here for a second, you can see that folders that have stuff inside of them are filled and folders that are empty are outlines. Okay, just to notice that. It's not going to be empty for long. Let's go into my scripts folder and let's make a brand new script, and we're just going to say, we're going to call this the Hello World script. All right, so right click inside of this area here. I'm going to make a brand new C# script. Here it is right here, C# script. It starts off as new behavior script. Let's just call this Hello World. Okay? My Hello World script actually is a new Hello World class. That's what it creates for you. And I want to just talk about, kind of scripting in Unity. Right now, this script will never work because, first of all, there's 2 things about scripts in Unity. One, they are inheriting from mono behavior. This is kind of a little preview of what the script looks like on the right. Okay. Notice that the script has a public keyword here. This is C#. Class, which identifies this thing inside the curly braces as a class. The name of the class, which is Hello World. A colon, which means extends. And mono behavior, which is the superclass, right, that this is inheriting from. So it's using inheritance. I have 2 functions here that it's previewing. One is the start function, which triggers one time. Whenever this game object instantiates in the scene, the start function triggers once. And then the update function, which triggers 60 times or more every second. Every frame is what's happening here. All right? What I need to do in order for me to launch this script and to make it work the way it is, there's other ways to do it in different ways. I need to attach it to the game controller, right? So I'm clicking on the game controller. And I can take the script from the assets and drag and drop it on top of the button where it says add component. And when I do that now, you can see that the hello world script is connected to my game controller. This means that the hello world script is going to run when my game controller is instantiated in the scene automatically. Let's double click on the hello world script and it's going to pull up your default editor, which for most of you will be either Visual Studio 2019 or 2022. Let's do that. Although you can always set it up with Visual Studio Code as well. So here's Visual Studio 2022, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to pull up my little script. And it's going to take time, so give it a second. And once it does, okay, here we go. It says, review project and solution changes. The projects are not supported or need project behavior impacting modifications. It says unsupported. And if you ever get this thing that says there's something that's unsupported, you know, whatever, just press OK, right? It talks about stuff. Usually it'll change and morph and it'll fix itself over time. Don't worry about it, is what I'm saying. Remember, it's just an editor. You can use any editor you want for Visual Studio, for Unity. And let's see what else it's giving us. It's giving me a little login. Okay. I don't care about logging in right now. On the left, you're going to see that there's a solution window. I'm just going to pin it up here. And what it's going to do a lot of times for the assembly, one day when this thing, it's just updating right now. For the assembly information, you can see that mine's running. Yours is probably already up, right? My poor Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio, I mean. And by the way, if something messes up, here's something else I want to talk about. Let's suppose your Visual Studio doesn't work, like mine is acting up right now. Am I really that concerned? Notice it says it's still working, it's ready, it's doing some background tasks, which is what's happening right now, okay? Give it a second, guys, because usually what happens is there's some updates that are going on in the background. Don't be kind of impatient. Worst case scenario, we already know what the script looks like, and we can always pull it up again. So just wait. It's doing its background tasks. But let's say I don't like this editor and I want to use Visual Studio Code, which I also have installed here on my system. So here's my Visual Studio Code. It's a much skimmed down version of an editor. Remember that Visual Studio Code can also support Unity. How do I do that? If I go back to Unity, I can go to File if you want to change your editor, right? And if I go to Preferences, or Edit Preferences, sorry, then what you can do is, for your external tools, you can define what tool you want to use. For example, I can define Visual Studio Code as my main editor, right? And then if I use that one and I close this off and double click on Hello World, it'll launch it on Visual Studio Code, right? As opposed to in Visual Studio. Yes, trust. And you can see that was much faster. Again, to me, it doesn't matter how you code. It's just that sometimes Visual Studio 2022, in my opinion, gives you better code hinting and code coloring than Visual Studio Code, depending on how it works. So here we have a Hello World class with mono behavior and a start function. What I want you to do first is I want to do a debug.log. And it's not giving me code hinting right now. That's okay. But I want to put debug.log, and in my log, I want to say something like, kind of my app started, right? And I want to use a semicolon because, again, this is C#. Save. Okay. Once I've saved it here or anywhere, right? Doesn't matter if you're using this or in Visual Studio itself. Visual Studio is still doing its running around tasks. Let me just exit out of Visual Studio so I don't kill my system performance. If I go back to Unity, right, after I've saved it, you can see that it's going to recompile the script. Okay, so what's really happening here? And I want to talk about what's happening here. Unity doesn't run with C#. Unity on the background uses C++, right? So what happens is we're using Unity and C# as a scripting language, front end. The scripting language is going to be compiled into bytecode at the end, and it's going to use C++ and other things to optimize. So it uses something also called high performance C#, where we actually get really great performance out of it, even though it's not C++ native. All right, so if I want to run this code now locally, if I just press this play button, then Unity will run, and we should see in our console, app started, if we did everything right. Or an error. So see on the bottom here, we get this little message, and it says app started. Look, there it is right here. If I click onto it, you can see it. There's app started. So that's an indicator that, guess what? Our script, which we attached to the game controller, ran. Okay? At this point, I'm going to ask you, are you with me? So thumbs up if you're with me. If somehow you're not, you don't understand it, or whatever, we can move on. Thank you. Again, I'm just checking for, do you know what I'm asking you to do? Because I don't want to run forward and then, Tom, it doesn't work, right? And this is gonna scale. Okay, we're gonna ramp pretty quickly. So bear with me as we go very slowly. So what if I want to try that again? What if I say, you know what? I think there was a glitch last time I ran, Visual Studio. Let's try and run it with Visual Studio 2022 this time again. Is it going to work any differently? My suspicion is the answer is no. There's something I got to do on Visual Studio to fix it, and that's okay because I'm not totally worried about it, right? If there's something I need to fix on Visual Studio 2022, I'm going to look it up and fix it. We're developers. I'm not going to complain too much. I'm just going to work with Visual Studio Code and just deal with it. That's typically what I normally do, all right? And see how long this has taken? Well, look, here, now it worked finally. Now I'm back up and running with Visual Studio 2022. It was a bit of a glitch, but the great thing about Visual Studio 2022, which is a little different, is as we start to code, like I said, it gives us code hinting. That's what it should do. Like if I type in the dot, it should give me some code hinting about things that I can do. Now it's still running, believe it or not, in the background. And I'm not getting any code hinting or code coloring, just like Visual Studio Code. So really, so far, no real advantage. But you'll see as my system comes alive, it will actually physically work eventually. All right? Yours probably might work faster than mine. There it is. Look at that. Configure performance for, whatever. It's still working, right, is what's happening right now. So app start is what we have in there. So Visual Studio Code can do a lot of things, and Visual Studio can do very similar things to Visual Studio Code. One thing to note is here, see how it's spinning out of control like this? It's because my system's trying to do something in the background. There we go. Finally, it's starting to come alive. It takes time. I have to be honest with you, I'm also doing, I also have JetBrains ReSharper C# installed, right? So under extensions, right, you can see that I have ReSharper installed as an extension. ReSharper is a coding extension that helps both C++ and C#. It helps you code better, is what it does, okay? Or so we think. All right. Look at this. Based on it, you want to install extra components. I'm not going to do that right now. I'll do that offline or on my break. All right, so that's the first thing. So we've installed something. It works. It'd be nice if we can see something physically on the screen because this is more visual. Let's go back to Unity here, and what I want to do is I want to kind of install something that we can see, right? And for the first part, of what we're doing with our game, we're just going to talk about how to use our environment so we can set things up so it goes, right? I want some kind of controller. I want to move things around the screen. And for the first bit, what I want to do is I want to just add in some kind of cube, right? Let's add in a 2D object. Let's go to 2D object, and let's add in a sprite, which is a square. Okay, so a square. Here's my square. And the square is something that I want to be able to move around with code, right? So let's suppose my square right now represents my player. This is my, let's call in the game, you'll see that there's also a square representation in the game itself, right? It's just a texture. So a couple things to note. The difference between a regular empty game object that I've attached a script to and this object here, which is that was a square, is it's still a game object. There's the transform. But now we've added in a sprite renderer component. The sprite renderer component will draw a sprite. And this is the sprite that it's drawing, this little square. Square is part of, if I zoom out here a little bit, is part of, under packages, you can see that 2D sprites have been included as a package in Unity. And that is the square texture that has been included. You can't modify the texture because this is part of the Unity package, but you can replace it with any one of your own. Okay? So, going back to player, we have a renderer, and if I press play, you're going to see a couple things that happen now. I'm going to get my little console that says app started. There it is. And you're going to see a square in the game. I want to be able to control the square, and for this thing, I need a script. Let's add a script now to the player. Another way to add a script to the player, instead of doing a script first, we actually added a script first here, like this. But you can also add a script here by add component. If I click add component, and if I type in script, you can see that there is new script that I can add in the bottom, right? You can name the script whatever you want. So for example, let's call this player behavior. Okay? And if I create and add player behavior, it's going to add that script, right, to the player game object that we've put in the scene, which is right now just a square. However, and this is what I don't like when I do it this way, if I go to scripts, it's not in there, right? It's actually sitting out here in the assets main folder, which is ugly. However, what we can do is if we made something like this happen and we're not happy with what we like, we can just drag and drop any asset in any folder we want and Unity will update. So if I take this player behavior script and I drag and drop it into my scripts folder, then if I double click on my scripts folder, it's there now. So it's organized. So again, this is a second way of attaching a script to a game object. So far, I'm telling you that the only way you can have functionality attached to a game object is through a script, okay? And there's two scripts. One that's attached to the game controller, which is really nothing. It's an empty object with a little empty script. And the other one, which is the player script, which is identical to the other one, the other script. Okay, let's double click on this player behavior script and let's run it in Visual Studio 2022. There it is, there's player behavior. It looks identical to Hello World. Hello World, here's player behavior, right? So what I want to do with the player behavior now is I want to be able to move the object that this script is attached to. Okay, I need references to this object. One thing that we want is the transform, and I want some input. Now by default, Unity has an old input manager that we use, and for you to see what that is, if I go to, again, File, and actually there's a couple ways to get that, we'll get to there. You can go to Edit, when you go to Edit, you can go to Project Settings. That's one way to get there, and you can see if I go to Project Settings on the left, there's Input Manager. This is what I'm looking at, right? Or you can also go to File, Build Settings, and notice that Build Settings, you don't have a scene. Whenever I build my application, I need a scene that's attached to my build settings, and so this is a good idea to add my open scenes to my build. I'm going to click Add Open Scenes, which adds my main scene, and I want to delete this one, right? So I want to get rid of that empty old scene that I had. You can use your delete button to clean that up. All right, so scenes main is the only thing that should be in build settings. And if I look down here, here's player settings again. So that's another way of getting to player settings. All right, you can get player settings here, or you can get to player settings through your edit button, edit menu, under project settings. So here's player. We want the input manager right here. The input manager, it defines a bunch of axes that's inside the input manager, And we have something called the horizontal, and we have the vertical axes, okay? Each of these axes is a group of input buttons. So horizontal axes, as an example, notice that the positive button is the right arrow, the negative button is the left arrow, but it also includes alternative negative and positive buttons, the A and the D key. So if you program input horizontal, right, then you'll enable the A key, the D key, the left button, and the right button, okay? And you're going to get values of -1 to 1, where -1 is the left input and 1 is the right input. -1 to 1. 0 is the dead zone in the middle. It doesn't do anything. Okay? So the reason why I'm showing you this is I'm going to code it now, right, in the script. Let's code that. So inside of the script, I want to get input. And I want to say something like this. I'm going to say, I want to define a float for x, right? And I want to say that x is equal to input, right? And I want to do, when I have my input, I want to do get axis horizontal. Okay, again, I'm coding without any hinting, but that's okay. If I make a mistake, it's going to warn me. And I want to do the same thing with y. When I want to go up and down, it's the y-axis. I'm going to go float y, and that's going to be input dot get axis, and then it's horizontal. Vertical. The string itself tells us, as an example, that we're going to be using the horizontal and vertical setup, right, for our input. Okay, so we're getting input here, but now that I have input, right, it's going to give us a value between -1 and 1, but all the little values in between. -1 is from 0 to -1 is 0, -0.1, -0.2, -0.3, -0.444445. Like, it's a lot of little things. If I want to only get -1 to 1, positive or negative, I can change this to get axis raw. Okay? So get axis raw is part of it. Get axis raw allows us to get input, as an example, from -1 to 1, but only -1, 0, or 1. That's all it's going to give us. Okay, good. Now that I have that, if I have input, then I want to change my transform component. Remember, if I go back to Unity for a second, the player has position, rotation, and scale. I want to change the transform position component, so I reposition my object, across the x-axis or the y-axis, right, depending on what I put in the input. Okay, that's what I want. So for here, I'm going to say something like, hey, transform dot position, right, is equal to a new, you have to use the new keyword here, vector2 object, right, where I want to put in x and y coordinates, and which is x and y, right? I just defined x and y as inputs. Whatever those input values are, I'm going to move it around. Now this is pretty bad because it's going to be from -1 to 1. Now -1 to 1 might be either too fast or too slow. Let's see what happens when I use it, okay? And how do I know this? Because if I go back to Unity, each of the units here in Unity, by the way, our objects in Unity start at the 0, 0 mark in the middle of the screen, okay? If I want to go up in Unity, it's +1. If I want to go down, it's -1. That's different than what we see in a regular scenario. For example, if I was to program, in most other applications, the bottom left corner of the screen is not 0, 0. It's the top left corner, right? And when I'm programming stuff. So I want to move things around, like I said, and the way I'm going to move things around is with input. If I press play here, and if I use the WASD buttons now, I should be able to move things around the screen, right? But it kind of moves back to normal. Why does it do that? So I can move it around kind of temporarily, but it doesn't move forever. Why? I'm changing the position, right? But I'm changing the position to either a -1, a 0, or a 1, right? So now that's interesting. But what I really meant to do is, I don't want to change the position. I want to add to the position. Whatever the position was before, I want to add one of these values. So I can say that, let's add a new vector, right? And again, what I want to do is if I say, if I go plus equals, it's going to complain, right? It's going to go, if I try and do this, right? So save. I can code this, but then it's going to give me this error. It's going to say something like, hey, operator plus equals is ambiguous on operands of type vector3 and vector2. Huh. So I can't really do this. I could say transform position is equal to transform position plus. I could do that. That's something I could do, right? Because you can't modify the position by itself, right? I could come up with some other things. I could say something like, well, I want to use the var keyword. This is kind of interesting in C#. Var is like auto in C++, right? I could say that, current position is equal to my transform dot position. I could say that, right? And then I could say something like, well, now that it's this, what if my current position is this plus, kind of a vector2 object, a new vector2 object. Can I do that? If I took that part, and I want to take that piece there when I copied it and paste it in here, could I do this? Is that possible? Is that something I can do? Where I say, well, my current position is equal to this transform position plus this new vector2 object, right? And then I can say my transform position is my new position. I can say that's equal to my, whatever my current position is. Which means that it's kind of doing the same thing that I would have done in one step, but I'm just breaking it down into two steps. Let's see if this works or if it's not going to work. And as soon as we compile, it's going to tell you if it's going to work or not. If you've got an error here, right? So you can see that there's an error here. It says, again, it's ambiguous on operands of type vector2 and vector3. And the question would be is, do I need a new keyword for vector2, right? Do I need that, right? Well, we're making a new vector2, but how do I add this vector2, as an example to the position? I want to add this in, right? So again, if I did it like this, and if I go back, you can see that it's going to go, again, non-invocable member vector2 cannot be used like a method. You can't do it this way either. So what is the option? What would you guys do? What do you think? If this is C#, it's like C++, how would you code it? Yep.
It's kind of simplistic.
Yep.
Just transform proposition equals new vector2, and then transform proposition of x plus x and y plus y.
Yep. You could do that too, right?
It's not very nice to look at, though.
So what he's saying is, what if I did something like this? So that transform position is equal to new vector2, right? I can do that, can I not? And what I can say is the transform position is equal to a new vector2, right? Where I have my current position dot x. I could do this too, right? And wherever my transform position is, so transform position dot x, transform dot position. Sorry, not getting any code hinting, guys. Position dot x plus my current position dot x. I could do that, and then the same thing with y. Okay, I'm not going to code that here because, yes, I could totally do that. But okay, let's go back to this then. What about if I did it here? If I said, whatever my current position is, my transform dot position, transform dot position dot y dot x plus x, right? Whatever the x is, and transform dot position dot y plus y. I could do that, right? Because I'm adding y to it, right? And that's my, we'll call this, instead of current position, we'll call this a new position, because that's what we're really doing. And we'll say that transform position is equal to the new position. I could do that, right? 2 lines, we can probably just make transform position is equal to all this. But I'm just showing you that you can do it over 2 lines, no problem, just like this, if you really wanted to. Let's see if this works any different, and let's see if there's any other things we can do here differently than this. Okay? And then we'll put this up on GitHub. So first, do we still have an error? So it says here, it says that the name transform is not right because I probably spelled transform incorrect. And it didn't give me any code hinting, so it is what it is. Transform. There we go. And let's try recompile again. It should get rid of the error first before we move on. Awesome. Let's press play. And now we should be able to move around our screen a little bit easier because, you know what? We're adding to the position, but now it's way gone. Oh man, what the hell? Why did it do that? Like it's gone, gone, gone. Right? And where is this thing? Like, is it still moving? Well, it's at minus 56. So if you look at it, it's like way over here off screen. Okay, that's where it is. And why is that? Because we spammed the crap out of it. That's what we did, right? When we clicked the button, it totally worked, but we got like input forever, right? And what we can do is we can scale this input by multiplying it by delta time. So if I multiply this by time dot delta time, come on. I don't know I think it's delta time. Can you check it out, guys? Because I don't get any code in. What was that? What? Thank you. I just don't get code hinting right now. I'll fix it later on today. If I do time.delta time, what it actually does for me is it should scale my input so it doesn't allow me to spam, right? Spamming input means like it'll delta time, remember, is like 0.1 or 0.15 or whatever it is, right? Or 1/6, every 16 milliseconds approximately. So if we try this now and go back, and let's try running again. Did I? Oh, it doesn't matter, but thank you. 2 semicolons is okay. It just means it's going to ignore the second one, right? But let's try if we can run this now. So if I run this now, we should be able to scale it a little bit more, and it should be really super slow, right? Because we're just scaling it according to delta time. So now you can see that it moves really slow, right? Ugh, right? And we can move all the way around we want anywhere on the screen, okay? Really simple input. Okay, cool. Well, then that means we need some kind of speed, right? And I want to multiply it by some kind of speed of the character, right? And in here, I can make a property. I can expose a property in the inspector by saying public, and we'll make it a float, and we'll call it speed. And right now, by default, the speed is 0. We can set up a default value for the speed. We can say that speed up here is equal to something like, I don't know, 2. Right? And 2, because it's a float, we need to use 2.0f. So I want to take that speed and multiply it by delta time. Okay? I want to do the same thing down here. So this is a typical way of getting input and modifying your position. We can actually do it in one blow. So this is I'm just going to refactor for a second. I'm just going to get rid of this position variable because we don't really need it, right? And it's going to look like this in one line. And I'm just going to just hide this piece here. I'm just really big. That's why you can see it this way. All right, so there's speed. I got speed set up as 2. It's public. Every time I make something public, it shows up in my inspector. Let me show you what that means. If I go back to my Unity, on the right, you can see that it's going to show up as a property in the inspector now in a second. And here it is. Look, here's speed, and here's 2. It's really good to show properties in the inspector because if I want to modify things on the fly, I can change the speed and try different values. Right now my speed is 2, but maybe that's too slow. Maybe I need a speed of 5 or 10, right? And I don't want to keep going back and forth and recompiling. I want to check it first here in live in the editor. So let's try that. Let's see if 2 is good enough, right? And you're probably going to note that 2 is probably too slow still. But when I'm live, I'm playing. Take a look. I'm playing. And if I change this value to 5, right, and go back and do it, it looks a little bit more natural, right? Maybe even 10 might be better, right? So now you can see that 10 is much better. I have much more control over something that's like 10, okay? But once I stop playing, take a look. If I stop playing, then the value will go back to 2 because anything I do in play mode gets canceled out. It gets erased. So we'd have to go back into the editor and change this value to 10 here because we found that that value is the right value, right? And when we play again, now it will stay as 10, okay? So that's why it's good to expose properties in the editor. So we can work quickly to do quick modifications of what we're doing. Awesome, excellent. And that is your first little 2D thing. In Unity, we've moved a little block around. We haven't got input yet. We're gonna do that next time. And I wanna put this up on GitHub now. So let's save. So file, save project, okay? And I want to exit out of Unity completely. Please do that. So the reason why I want to exit out of Unity and everything else is because what happens with Unity is it has a lot of meta files that are kind of held in reserve, right? And what we want to do, and I'm just bringing up a little command prompt here, right, is I want to go to that spot that I have my files. Remember I put it on the desktop under GBC? I'm just going to bring that up so you can see it. Here it is. Under the desktop, under GBC, we have 2014 F2022. This is the folder. And inside that folder, I have this. I have week 1A, right? In order for me to attach a repository on it, right, I need to drag and drop it into my console here. So I'm going to say CD on the console, space, and then take this folder and drag and drop it in here like this. So I don't have to swim to this folder. It just does it automatically. So again, I got the console, and I dragged and dropped the folder onto the console, and it's really that simple. And then press enter. Now I'm in there, right? To make my local repository, guys, this is going to be on your test, right, when it comes to Git commands. All right, ready? And this is recorded, so you can always look at the recording when you're doing your test. It's not a problem. Or you can take notes, up to you. The first command when we initialize a repository is git init. Let's do it together. Git init. When I press enter, you can see that it initializes the repository in this. Now, there's a problem here. If I initialize my repository this way, I got to go back and I'm going to show you something, right? Inside of my GAME2014 F2022 week 1A, you can see that I have a hidden .git folder that gets created, right? If you can't see the hidden .git folder, you can go to view and then you can kind of turn on hidden items, right? You can see if I turn on hidden items, I can see my hidden .git folder. The problem with me initializing my Git right now is it'll also add in eventually my library folder. I don't want to add my library folder ever on GitHub. It's too bloody massive. And like my friend here from Turkey asked me earlier, he said, hey, I have large file support turned on because I have to send all this big stuff to GitHub. Well, we can eliminate some of those things. We can eliminate the library by adding in a gitignore file. Okay, we need a gitignore file. And so let's get rid of the Git repository. If I get rid of this hidden folder, I can undo my initialization. I'm showing you this first thing so you know how to reset. So again, I'm going to click on Git and I'm going to right click and delete. Here's delete, and I can delete my hidden Git folder, which it's now my Git initialization is gone. I showed you how to add it and I showed you how to remove it. We need to grab a little file. I'm just going to go online here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find you a very simple version of a gitignore file. So if I search for it here on Google, if I say Unity gitignore, right? I'm searching for Unity gitignore. You do the same. It's going to come up with a gitignore file that you can download for yourself or you can create for yourself. So click on there. It's going to give you the Unity gitignore file. It looks like this. A gitignore file basically indicates which folders or files that will be ignored when you add them into your repository. Okay? So again, I can't really download this file because it's part of another project, but what I can do is if I go to my folder, the folder that's going to have that's going to be managed by Git, I can add in a empty text object. I can go new, and I can go text document, and I can call this document .gitignore. So it's not going to be a text document, it's going to be a .gitignore. Again, I'm just converting my text document to a gitignore file. What I need to do now is after I make my empty.gitignore, I need to double click on this document. It's going to pull up your favorite editor, right, like Notepad, or if you right click, you can go open with, and you can open with Visual Studio Code or something else that you have. I'm just going to use Notepad because I don't need anything greater than that, right? And then what I'm going to do is up on line, back to that gitignore file, I'm going to click on raw up on line here, take a look, and I'm going to copy everything from the raw file, copy, and paste it in my Notepad. This is a way of doing it. And then save. Now we have our gitignore file locally. Okay, again, a bit of a process, but nothing too great, nothing too crazy. Once we have our gitignore file the first time, we never need to do this again. Okay, so that's our gitignore file, and this is where the location of it is, right here, github.com, gitignore, blob, main, unity, gitignore. Okay. So now that I have my gitignore file, let's do that again. Let's go back over to my command line and do that initialization again. I'll do a git init, which initializes things with my gitignore file. Now, the next command, okay, that you have to remember for your test, little quiz, is git add dot. Git add dot, what it does is it adds all of the files that are not ignored to something called the staging area. So it's git add dot. This is the command, git add dot. Okay? Here it is, git add dot. So the first command is git init. That's initializing the folder. It creates the hidden.git folder in your project. Git add dot, which adds everything that's marked as something that's addable. And the last one is a commit. So I'm going to do a git commit minus M for message, and it's going to be the friendly message that you're going to attach to this snapshot. I want you to think about the first commit or the initial commit as our baseline snapshot. Once we take our baseline snapshot, any file changes, right, will be tracked. So, but we need a baseline. Where do our files start? Well, here's what our files are. If I add or remove, now we can add, we can use those things. So, git commit minus M, and there's two conventions for the first commit. It's either first commit or initial commit. It's up to you which one you want to use. I'm going to use initial commit. Okay? So I just use initial commit. Git commit minus M, initial commit.
Seems like I just also have libraries.
That means you didn't include your gitignore file.
I added.
It's got to be inside the right folder. You have to start over. All right, this is great. This is fantastic, but now I got to put this up on GitHub. In order for me to do that, I need to add it to my GitHub account, right? So in other words, on my GitHub account, I'm going to add a brand new repository. Let's do that together. Let's add a brand new repository, an empty repository, to your GitHub account. I'm going to make mine public. And for you, for this first lab, you make yours public too, okay? Later on, we'll talk about how to make it private and how to add me as a collaborator. But for today, public is okay because there's nothing in there really that should be private. I mean, we just added a little block that we moved around. Who cares, right? So here it is. We're going to add a new repository. We're going to rename it the same as what we called it. So we're going to say GAME2014 in the fall 2022 semester, and it's week 1A. And I'm going to press enter right here, and it's going to give me an empty container. So GitHub, it gives us steering directions. Take a look. We've already done this part. We've already done git init. We already did an add, and we did a commit. We did all these three pieces. All these three, right? What we need to do now is add in the last part. Now, if you've never done a push to Git before, and if you've just installed Git for Windows, you may need to configure your global username and email, okay? If you've never done it before. It's going to ask you to do that, right? But let's suppose you're okay. For your global username and email, for a configuration perspective, if I said git config username and email, this is what you do. If you've never done it before, you've got to go to your command prompt and you got to say git config -- global user.name and whatever your first name and last name is that you want to configure if you've never done it before, okay? And then the next line is git config -- global user.email, and the email associated with your GitHub account has got to be there. Those two things are what you must have if you've never done a push before through your command prompt. Okay, you must do these things. Or you're going to get an error saying, I don't know who you are, I can't do anything. And then it's going to ask you for the first time when we actually do the push, it's going to say, please log in with your credentials. Here's your username, what is your username, and what is your password? It's going to ask you that for the first time. Once you put in your username and password the first time, it's going to remember forever. And you never have to configure your console again. Okay, at least on a PC. On a Mac, it's slightly different. Okay, just to let you know. So this is nice. I like it. Let's do this last part, which is I want to grab these last 3 lines of code from my steering directions on GitHub, the little repository I made that was empty. I want to grab these last 3 lines of code, copy them, and then go back to my command prompt and right-click. And what it's going to do when you right-click on your command prompt in Windows, it's going to paste everything in. If you're using a Mac, you need to right-click and select paste. It'll do the same thing. And then if I press enter, it's going to push everything up on GitHub. For you, it might ask you to log in for the first time with GitHub if you've never done it before, right? But once you've done it, it'll remember your credentials with your credential manager and it'll be there for good. My friends, this is the process. And if I refresh, you can see now that I have my files and folder up on GitHub. This is your Lab 1. Lab 1 can be found up on Blackboard. Here's Blackboard. And if you look at Lab 1, here it is, Unity and GitHub. It's due, this is incorrect, it's due on Sunday, this Sunday at midnight. So you have a chance to go through the video again and submit your Lab 1, which is just proving to me that you know how to, you have a GitHub account of your own and you know how to push with your command line. Okay? Questions about the stuff that we talked about today? We talked about a lot of stuff. Let's review. We talked about the industry a little bit, right? We also talked about, hey, what's a pro layout in Unity? What do I think is better, compared to maybe what you like? Default layout's kind of ugly. Our little layout is more useful, and that's why I kind of created that for you. Okay, that's our little pro layout, is what I like to say. It's kind of a joke, but it is what it is. We did that. Then we went up on Unity and we did a bit of a tour of Unity, and we said, hey, Unity is a game engine, but we use something called game objects, and game objects in Unity are component-based. But every game object has what? A transform component with position, location, and scale. All right? Position, rotation, and scale. I'll be okay. And once we have those, we can attach scripts to game objects. We did that, and we did our first little script that allows us to move a little square around the screen. Yay! Right. And then we closed down our project. We added a gitignore file to our project, and we pushed it up on GitHub with command line. That's what we did today. It sounds like nothing, but this is the beginning of a very slopey line that we're going to go, it's going to really ramp, is what I'm saying. We're going to go from this to something that's way more challenging. Okay, this is super easy today, and it should be a review for some of you. Remember, you're also going to get some of this from Joss on the next time you see him. I think it's Monday or Tuesday. I'm not sure which day it is. Which one is it? Monday. So Monday you're going to see Joss for the other engines course, which is Unity 2D desktop. Okay? Questions for me before we go for the day? Yes?
Sorry, Tom, I think you mentioned this, I just missed it. So we upload just a link to the repo in the lab one.
Yes. Yeah, that's all I need for now. Because I don't need a video. I don't need you to demo that you can move things around with your little kid. It's silly, right?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
So, we're going to only have videos for the assignments or also for some labs?
There might be video requirements for labs. I will talk about it next week. And only if the lab is more meaty. Right now the lab is silly, right? So let's wait till we have a real lab, and then yes, might be a 2-minute video requirement. You do a 2-minute video and say, here, look, it's working, come by, right?
You
Like
will
one of
let
those.
us know when it's going to
Absolutely. I'll let you know everything when the time comes. Okay? Any other questions before we depart for the day? Guys, if you couldn't get your Unity installed today done, please do so before the next class. Before JOS, actually. It might be a good idea. Also, number 2, if you couldn't make Visual Studio work, just like I couldn't, fix it before the next class. All right? It's important that you get it fixed. Also, LD Player, if you couldn't get that going, fix it before the next class because we're going to be using it, right? And finally, if you couldn't install Git, fix it before the next class so we can do Git commands from your console, all right? Okay, that's it for me, guys. I'm going to stop recording this, and I'll let you guys go for the day. Thank you so much for attending.